All right, I've already tested this game on the RTX 3060 and RTX 3080, but I figured we need to do some AMD testing, especially since this game forces ray tracing, and I also thought, hey, the Red Devil 6800 XT for a Doom game seems appropriate. Also, the 6800 XT is interesting in that it is a, generally similar rasterized performance to the 3080, which I've already tested in this game. But this game requires ray tracing. Also, we should talk about what sort of settings we're using here. This is 1440p. I have resolution scaling turned off, and using TAA as the anti-aliasing technique right now because the resolution scaling is set to 100%, so this is full native 1440p, and we are at Ultra Nightmare settings, which is currently max settings in the game. There's a patch coming on later which will introduce path tracing, but that is not currently out yet. Now, let's go ahead and kick on the benchmark numbers so we can kind of see what we're getting here. And it's looking like we are dipping into the mid-50s at times, but it is certainly playable. Probably not the settings I would stay on if I was actually fully completing the game at these settings. Also note, if you look at the frame rate targets, frame rate numbers in the top left corner, the one on the left is the current frame rate at that moment. The middle is the average since I clicked the run benchmark number button, and then the one on the right is the 1% lows, again averaging as we've ran the benchmark counter. Also, if you're judging smoothness, look at the frame time graph. This is running absolutely buttery smooth, but I'm capturing a 60 FPS capture, which is out of sync with the frame rate of the game. So if you're seeing screen tearing or motion judder, things like that, that is not present in actual gameplay. That is an artifact of capturing 60 FPS footage in a game that is not running at 60 frames per second. So do keep that in mind. The frame time graph is buttery smooth. This game does not stutter. It has amazing frame times. But man, my performance is not necessarily amazing here. I will try out some other settings, but I also want to try out some other areas of the game. I want to see if this area is still bugged out for me. I'm having some issues with the first dragon mission. But also I did want to mention in my last video, I said that this was bugged, except it's actually not. I figured this out. Okay. I thought that you just had to time the dodges, but you don't just time the dodges. You actually have to dodge up, down, left, or right. It is directional. Anyway, so this one I would have to dodge to the left. Anyway, this one, again, I will have to dodge to the left, but sometimes you have to dodge up or down. So anyway, the good news if you watched my last video is this is not actually bugged out. This is, I'm just dumb. I didn't notice the directional nature of the dodges being required. I thought it was progression blocking. It is not. I was just stupid. Anyway, let's go ahead and test out another mission, though, where we'll actually play through a bunch of different graphic settings, but just giving you an idea that there are different types of missions. There's mech missions, all of that. But let's go to the first area of the game, which actually has been somewhat demanding compared to other areas, meaning when you do first buy this game, this initial area, I think, is a fairly good test of about how you will run. It's probably not the most demanding area in the entire game, but it certainly isn't super lightweight or anything. Looking like we're getting a little over 50 FPS currently. By the way, do note that the game does have like wind simulations and a lot of physics. There's a lot of destructible stuff, in addition to the required ray tracing. So while this is definitely a lot heavier than Doom Eternal, there's certainly a lot of things it is doing that Doom Eternal was not. Ooh, wow, we dipped into the 1% lows at about 38 there for that big explosion. So these are definitely not the settings I'm going to be staying on for this card, but let's at least get through a bit of this battle scene here so that we can get an idea of what the performance is at native before we try maybe resolution scaling. There's some FSR, there's some XeSS, and then we can also try out some reduced settings and other resolutions. How about 1080p? How about 1440p? So it's looking like our average here is 49 FPS, 1% lows at 38, kind of playing through that area. This is definitely not the way we want to go. Before adjusting graphic settings, I think I'm going to try out some resolution scaling, since a lot of what's heavy about this is probably the ray tracing. And one of the best ways to gain back ray tracing performance is scaling the rendering resolution, because it's very pixel count dependent. We could try FSR or XeSS. It'll also be interesting actually to get an idea not only of performance differences here, but also of image quality differences. So let's keep an eye out for those. We're going to go to FSR quality, which again, given that this is not FSR4, because we're on a RX 6800 XT, this does not support FSR4. Also, I don't think FSR4 is integrated into the game at this point. I haven't tried out my 9000 series GPUs yet. Do you guys want to see a 9070 XT test in this game? Let me know in the comments if there's enough interest. I could probably check that out as well. So let's start this first mission again. This again is using FSR quality. So FSR quality, but otherwise maxed out at 1440p. But again, lowering the internal rendering resolution. Oh yeah, we can tell that the performance has increased significantly. This feels a lot smoother. The frame rate numbers look to be in the mid 70s, but let's get into this, see what this explosion does. All right, the 1% lows on that explosion were 56 FPS. Remember, I think it dropped to like 38 when we were at native resolution. So it is looking like things are a lot better with the FSR engaged. Remember, not using any kind of frame generation at this point, just the resolution scaling. Looks like we're getting through this fight averaging closer to 70 FPS with 1% lows at 56. So much, much better. Not saying you wouldn't necessarily want an even higher frame rate for this kind of game. But yeah, 1% lows are certainly dipping a little bit under 60, but averaging about 70 FPS for this fight. I also want to look at image quality. So we're using FSR scaling. Like, I'm noticing some ghosting. Look at these tree branches. Do you see how there's a little ghosting trail behind the branches as I strafe left and right? There's also a little bit of breakup to the image. It's not awful, but again, there is some noticeable issues with the FSR presentation here. Let's go ahead and switch to using XeSS as an alternative. This is Intel's upscaling solution, but it does have some AI basis to it, whereas the FSR versions that can run on the 6800 XT don't, but they're using like a DP4A fallback, so it doesn't look as good as it would on an Intel GPU or run as good, but it can often beat the image quality of FSR. I'm curious how we do here. Intel, though, has renamed their quality settings to where I think I need to use ultra quality to actually have the same internal rendering resolution as what the other brands call quality. If I used quality, it would actually be less internal rendering resolution. So I'm gonna go ahead and use ultra quality, which again, I think uses the same internal rendering resolution as FSR quality does due to the naming differences. And hey, look, notice that there is no ghosting trails on those trees now. It's a little subjective. This is not a extremely detailed image quality test, but I do also think the fencing and the fire looks a little bit better as well. So based off of this extremely brief test, I'm gonna give image quality edge to XeSS here, but let's go ahead and restart the map and play through the same stuff and see how the performance, how the performance works out. So I'm gonna go ahead and start the averages, restart the averages here. So it looks like we're possibly a couple FPS lower than we were on the FSR quality. Let's see how the big explosion does as we get through this area. Yeah, this is gonna explode here. Let's see how that does. Bottomed out at about 55. Again, way better than native resolution. I think we're a couple FPS lower than we were with FSR quality. Let's go ahead and play through the fight, which again is not an exact apples to apples test because I may or may not be doing the exact same combat moves, but it should be fairly comparable gameplay for our purposes here. We're just trying to get an idea of what the experience is like using XeSS versus FSR for the AMD users looking to play the game. And it's looking like our average is 67. I think it was 70 using FSR quality. 1% lows are 56 versus I think 57 when we were using FSR. So in general, I have to say that while we've lost a couple frames, I think that the overall experience here with XeSS, I think the image quality is a little bit better. So I think that based on this admittedly limited test, my personal preference here would be to use XeSS rather than FSR for scaling in this game on AMD users, and it is looking like it might be worth it to do it, given the amount of performance gains that we got. Now, I also want to try out 4K resolution before we also try playing around with different graphic settings. Actually, you know what? Let's try 1080p first. So let's go to 1080p, but let's turn off upscaling. So I'm going to go back to TAA with resolution scaling turned off. We're now at 1080p maxed out. So let's go ahead and test out some maxed native 1080p results before we look at the 4K results. All right, let's restart from the same checkpoint, play through the same general area to again get an idea of how this is scaling. So native TAA 1080p rendering resolution. Looks like this initial area is a little over 70 FPS. Let's go ahead and go through here, get an idea of what this explosion looks like. Explosion, 1% lows at 56. Seeing current averages at 68-ish. Let's get through the combat. It's honestly looking like our performance is extremely similar at native 1080p TAA as it was to 1440p XeSS Ultra Quality. Looking like the performance profile is extremely similar between these two options. Again, not amazing performance for 1080p native, but this is maximum settings. Like I said, though, the graphic settings haven't seemed to yield massive performance boosts other than resolution scaling, so there's that. Again, we could try out maybe resolution scaling a bit at 1080p, but honestly, I'm more interested in 4K. I think a lot of people who bought a 6800 XT were buying it for either 1440p or 4K gaming, not that some wouldn't be using it at 1080p. But I do want to take a look at this. So first, let's get an idea of what native 4K looks like. Let's go ahead and restart the map. I have a feeling it's not gonna, well, it might look good, but it's not gonna perform well. Wow, we are definitely under 30 FPS here. So I don't think I'm even gonna complete this run because it's just painful to be under 30 FPS in a Doom game. Graphics standing still look quite nice though. Anyway, let's go ahead and adjust the settings and then restart the run. I think we're gonna start with resolution scaling. Like I said, XeSS seems to be working out pretty well here. I'm gonna go all the way down to performance mode, honestly, just because I think that's gonna be necessary. So let's start with that. So performance mode XeSS, this is drastically reducing the rendering resolution of the game, but the XeSS algorithm puts up a good fight, even in the performance mode. It's certainly not amazing, but it is probably gonna get us a usable experience here. Looks like we're getting around 60 FPS now in this intro area, but as we saw, it does get a little bit more demanding as we run down the line here. I'm gonna go ahead and block these. And let's see how the explosion does. Dropped to 49 for the 1% lows as we rounded through there. So that was certainly noticeable. And combat is, unfortunately, mostly under 60 FPS here. 1% lows, we're looking at 49 currently. In general, it's looking like max settings, even with performance mode upscaling, is probably just not going to be the way you're going to want to play this on the 6800 XT. So I think what we're going to do is adjust graphic settings now. I'm going to go ahead and pull the graphic settings down to medium, although that's shadow quality. Overall slider. There's not a big difference between Ultra Nightmare and high in performance. Medium at least gets you a somewhat noticeable jump, even if it's not huge. So we're gonna start with this. Best practice would be to restart the game. However, I have noticed that I get the performance jump and notice the visual differences without the restart. So I'm gonna go ahead and just do this. You can already tell performance is better. We are closer to 70 FPS now. whereas previously we were closer to 60 FPS in this area. Let's see how it holds up in the more demanding areas, especially as we go through that big explosion and the larger combat encounter. So big explosion, 1% lows dip to 56. Averages are still staying above 60. Let's see how we do going through this combat area. Doing similar combat, again, not a perfect match, but similar stuff to what we did before. And what are we getting here? It's looking like, yeah, averaging over 60 FPS now. 1% lows at 57, which is not terrible or anything. Overall, it is looking like you can get a over 60 FPS experience at 4K output, but certainly not internal rendering resolution on the 6800 XT. So it looks like medium settings and XeSS performance is probably gonna be the way to go here. The last thing I'd like to test out is, now that we're at the medium settings, I think I want to try dropping down to the lower resolutions now, but at the medium settings. I'm gonna go ahead and try out native again. So let's go to TAA native, but at 1440p, and take another look at things at medium settings now. So medium settings at native 1440p. If this is already a little under 60, it's looking like this is not gonna be quite enough. Not gonna be quite enough to get us a 60 FPS experience at native here. So it is looking like resolution scaling is probably gonna be in the cards. Yeah, that's still dipping into the low 40s. Yeah, it really is looking like resolution scaling is probably gonna be a thing you're gonna be doing on a 6800 XT if you're on a 1440p display. I don't think I even want to complete this entire combat encounter. Let's speed things up and just go ahead and do what I think makes sense, which is drop down to XeSS Ultra Quality and see how that does for us. So let's restart this run. Now we've got performance numbers over 80 in this initial section, which we know will drop as it gets more demanding, but it should be, I think, giving us enough headroom for these more demanding areas as we get through it. Let's see how this explosion does. Boom, and 1% lows above 60 still, 63. I think these are gonna be the potentially good settings to use, because again, medium graphic settings in this game are very difficult to tell apart from the Ultra Nightmare, to be honest. When I'm playing the game, I don't really notice differences. I haven't really done a lot of side-by-side analysis, but I did watch hardware unbox testing, and they had some side-by-side shots where it is really not a dramatic difference between medium and Ultra Nightmare in some side-by-sides. I'm curious what we'll see when somebody like Digital Foundry does an analysis here, but again, yeah, looking like here we're averaging 78, 1% lows in the mid-60s. I think these sort of settings might be more appropriate to this fast-paced of a game. Let's go ahead and try out 1080p, but now let's do it at native resolution. But we'll be doing native resolution TAA with medium settings, and I have a feeling that performance is gonna be a lot more acceptable compared to what we saw at Ultra Nightmare. Again, it's not a massive performance increase by going down to medium, but I think given where our performance was at, it's certainly a welcome change. Yeah, once again, it's looking like native 1080p TAA performs a lot like 1440p XeSS Ultra Quality. It's looking to have a very similar performance profile. Yeah, explosion dropping the 1% lows to 64, averaging 79 currently. Let's get through a bit of this fight and see how that holds up. But this is seeming to, why did I switch weapons? Did I run out of ammo or something? Oh, I guess I ran out of ammo. Here, let's get some ammo. Of course, I could just use different weapons, but I was trying to keep things as similar as possible between runs. But I think we get the idea. We're averaging upper 70s, about 77, 78, 1% lows at 65. I think this is going to be a perfectly good way to experience this game. So my final thoughts on the 6800 XT in this game. By the way, the CPU here is still the RX 5600X CPU that I used on my 3080 testing. Notice that GPU utilization is not quite 99% or anything like that, so it's possible that we are even hitting some CPU limitation here. Thought I'd mention that here at the end of the video, but the point is, a 5600X and 6800 XT would have been a very natural pairing at the time these parts were new. So we're talking about, what, 5 years ago-ish now? So if you're on this sort of a system, it's looking like you can get a good experience in this game. Again, performance very, very noticeably lower than what you got in Doom Eternal. But 1080p, 1440p, and 4K are all playable at settings that don't look awful or anything. The resolution scaling is probably the biggest disappointment for 6800 XT users, given that without, FSR4 access on this kind of hardware, you can tell some upscaling artifacts. That being said, I thought XeSS is putting up a good fight in this game, and I think you'll be able to just, enjoy the gameplay, not get too hung up on any little upscaling details, and have a good time. Like I said, the medium settings seem to be a good compromise between performance and visuals. If you want that little extra boost above what we were able to do on the Ultra Nightmare settings, although Ultra Nightmare was usable, I do think the medium settings are probably going to be the better choice for most people on this hardware. Like I said, frame time graphs look absolutely beautiful in this game, though. No stutters at all. So frame time consistency can honestly make a slightly lower average feel a lot better than what you might be used to in some other games. So if you've been playing some stuttery games that have a higher average FPS, but have awful 1% lows and stutters, you might be surprised at how this feels in comparison. Anyway, I do want to test out some other GPUs in this game, so go ahead and think about what GPUs you'd like to see. Maybe the 9070 XT for another AMD GPU. Take a look at FSR. Whether there is FSR4 support in this game, I've heard that there isn't, though. Also, again, if you're looking to buy this game, I might put a Games Planet link in the video description. I've been looking at using their affiliate links because, honestly, I do get a commission on that. But at no additional cost to you, and actually the cost is lower than buying the game directly on Steam. And I have researched Games Planet. Most CD key sites I refuse to work with because they are a bit on the shady side. Games Planet is confirmed to get their Steam keys directly from game developers and publishers, rather than any sort of sketchy shenanigans that may or may not be taking place on some other CD key sellers. So I do like that, and so I'm interested in maybe putting links to those on some of my videos now, because better deal than buying it from Steam for you, and no additional cost using the affiliate link, but might generate some income for the channel, because I did do things like spend $100 on this version of the game to get the 2 days early access to make these videos, rather than just waiting until it came out for the cheaper version of the game or whatever. Anyway, I hope all of you have an excellent day and enjoyed the video and found it useful.